Survey. Brownie's helped the district for years and years just with data analysis and has done just a tremendous job in kind of getting all the data collected that the board needed to make these decisions. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to him.
All right, thank you, Katie. We're going to talk about water levels and, of course, a couple of other duties, maybe that kind of get our version of an agency update on things that are related to going on here in GMD 1. But we have an annual program through the state we call the Cooperative Water Level Program because it's with the Kansas Geological Survey and the Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Water Resources, where we go out in January and measure about 1,400 water wells, again primarily over the High Plains Aquifer in western and south central Kansas. And you can kind of see in GMD 1, the KGS measures the western half of the district, and Mike and his shop measures the eastern side. So when we talk about water levels, we always like to look at the precipitation because irrigation is such a dominant use of water. Precip is a very good indicator of what we expect. So this is a map. The National Weather Service NOAA has a really nice interactive precipitation website that you can do a lot of this stuff online. But this is showing us a normal precipitation, which is just the average over the last three full decades. And 18 inches on the western side, and we get almost to 40 on the eastern side. But what you don't see anything on this map is the dark blues, and the dark blues is less than 10 inches. You have to look at what we got in 2022 to see the blues that showed up, and just how exceptionally dry this was in certain parts of the state. Some parts here in the southwest, it was the driest that they've seen on record. That's going back to the 1800s. And so that's the total amount that came in 2022. And when you compare that as what percentage deviation is that from the normal map, you get this one, and anything that's a tan or orange is less than normal. And some of these places are less than 50% of what they normally got, what they should have gotten based on that average conditions. And so you see, where that dry conditions are, the western side of the state and the southern border. And then when you go look at the latest drought maps, that's exactly what shows up. They don't have a D5. D4 is the highest level of drought classifications, and it's exceptional drought categories. And then again, you see there's a western third, and then going along the Oklahoma line has been just really, really dry, really tough year. And so when we see these things, we kind of expect the water levels will probably be affected accordingly because the precipitation influences those pumping demands, and as those pumping demands go, so do the water levels. And so we can break these out also by month. And so I'm going back to the fall of 2021. And the dark reds are saying 5% of the precipitation that occurs in that month normally occurred. And so red's bad, right? And so we started off 2022 dry going into it. The ambient conditions were already dry. And then it just continued. January, February, March, April, the western side of the state really took a beating in terms of what the precipitation was or lack thereof. We had a couple of snowfall events, last year, and then it just continued on through the summer months and into the fall. And so, again, when we see this, that usually is an indication to us that the pumping season is going to probably be a little bit longer and the water levels are going to probably be down a little bit. But having said that, they weren't as bad as I thought they were going to be. So I guess that's kind of the good news. And so this graph is a little bit busy. It's got a lot of stuff on here, but what we're showing is from 2022 to 2023. This is the 2022 year, 2021, 1918, we're going all the way back to 1996. And the very first line in there is a red line that corresponds with GMD 1. And so you just kind of see where we fell this year relative to the past years. And so of the 130 wells that were measured between our agencies this year, the average water level change was about 1.27 feet. This is based on the raw information we have available to us now. And so that puts us right about here. This is a 1 foot decline, 2 foot, 3 foot decline. So you see the declines we saw this year are on par with what we saw in 2011, 2012, our last big drought event. When the rains do come, like in 17, 18, 19, we got pretty close to those zero lines. But, we're taking a step back to what we saw in 2011 and 12. And then the rest of those lines in each year are the other GMDs that we have. And so 2 and 5, they kind of go up and down around the zero line. GMD 3 to the southwest is this orange line. The green one is up north, and then the gray is the entire district. So that's kind of how it looks in graph form. I'm a map guy, and so this is just showing us then how those results look across the High Plains Aquifer. Again, we're here in Scott City, so you can see GMD 4, GMD 1, and then GMD 3 down here to the south. I'll zoom in a little bit to the district here. Again, so the biggest declines we saw were up in the southern part of Wallace County, in the western area. There, some of those wells dropped 7 feet. You see a few bullseyes here across the county. And a lot of those we cleaned up. We went out and measured again. I measured the wells just this morning, and so those have improved. Really, the big story is when we go back and look at the entire network, is you see some of these blue or red dots or diamonds or squares. Those were wells that weren't measured. And the reason for a lot of that was the wells were operating. They were pumping in January when we were out there. And so our data is going to be a little bit noisy this year because there's a longer pumping season. People were pumping while we were out measuring when they're normally not. And so that's going to make the data a little bit noisy in terms of our water level results this year. But so we had a couple of those bullseyes in parts of the district here, and we've gone out and remeasured these wells. And so this map's going to change a little bit for the better because the aquifer had more time to recover since January. Now, it's a little hard to see, but the biggest thing, looking back, if we look at the dark tan areas here, in orange, that's a 2-foot decline. And you can see that orange, that 2-foot decline is pretty predominant across the High Plains. And when you go back and look at last year, the year before that, and then 18, 19, back to 17, you can just see how much more widespread the declines were. We didn't really have a big hotspot area where we had a big, massive area of decline. It was much more spread out, but it was much more significant across the entire aquifer than we've seen in years past. And again, it's those drought conditions. And so the more moisture we get, the better off we are. And so that's what we're hoping for next year is get some more snow events, get a little more thunderstorms in here, and get a little more precipitation. But that's kind of the take-home message for 2022 in terms of the water level changes. It's a little bit more expanded in terms of what the declines were, but the data is also very noisy because the season was longer and people were operating throughout the winter months. Any questions related to the water levels? We can come back to that too when we go to it. I do want to talk a little bit about Wichita County. I was asked to talk about some of the results maybe we've seen. And I showed this last year. This is a graph that's showing water usage on the X and then water level change on the Y. And when it's really dry, 2011 and 12, lots of water gets used. We have big declines versus 2019, 18, when it rains a lot, not much water is used, we have less declines. And then this is that relationship, that Q-stable relationship that we had in there. And what you can see in here is there's a very notable shift after 2014 that David talked about a little bit. There's a shift in usage that's taken place here in Wichita County. But we see this shift also in other areas of Kansas and the High Plains. And so the question is that really a water conservation shift? Is that shift that we see in usage, is that intentional or is that just happenstance? And so David kind of mentioned some of that over here with that graph. And so, but there's really a second shift here in that water usage versus precipitation. So something's happened since 2000, after 17. And again, we have the limas here, we have water conservation areas, but we see this shift elsewhere occurring in the High Plains, and a lot of it is because of this. We see a reduction in the irrigated acres. And so with the reduction of irrigated acres, the simple volume of water is less. And so this is stuff that Don Whittemore presented at the Kansas Governor's Conference. So the test of the tape here then is how does this look in terms of acre feet per acre, and then you still see that shift. That's the good news. That means there's actually a shift that did take place here. Other places where we see that similar shift, when we look at acre feet per acre, they slide right back up in the line, and you can kind of see, okay, that change in usage is not so much that they were conservation driven, it's just because a lot more acres came out of production. Whereas here, we do have a drop in acreage, but we also have a drop in the application rates on those fields. And so these blue areas are confidence intervals from a statistical standpoint, and we don't want those to overlap, and so we're good here. So that's a good indication that's telling us that yes, the water level changes, the water use reductions that we see taking place in Wichita County are results of actually conservation efforts and people trying to make a difference. And so that's the good news for the day. The last thing I want to talk about is the index well program. Maybe you're familiar with these. These are wells that are continuously operated every hour. You can go online and see what the water levels are. And the district has a pretty good distribution of them. And we had one up here in the very northwest corner of Wichita County. It's right there. And this is what the hydrograph of that well looks like. It's not very exciting, right? This is a 1 foot decline. And you kind of see there's a slow general decline in the water tables. About the only thing exciting about this well is it goes up and down in response to barometric pressure. So high pressure comes in, the water tables drop. Low pressure comes in, the water tables rise. And that difference gets smaller in the summer months because the change in barometric pressure isn't as much. And we actually see that in the water levels. So I guess that's one exciting thing about that. But we don't really see responses to pumping in here. And so this last year, we saw a new index well. The one I just showed you was right here. And then just a couple miles away, we had an opportunity to equip, with GMD1's help, equipped a well that was re-drilled and then later abandoned. The owner decided to go back to the original point of diversion, but we still had good connection to the aquifer. And this is what this hydrograph looks like. And it does give us a much bigger response and an idea of what the aquifer does during the pumping season within that northwest corner of Wichita County, because that's a very large concentration of those WCAs are up there. And so this will give us a really good idea of exactly some of the dynamics that take place there. It also gives you an example of just how different the aquifer is just a few miles apart. I mean, those wells have just totally different signatures in terms of what the water level changes are, and they're not that far apart, but this one's going to give us a real good idea and what those net inflows are flowing into the aquifer where it's much more heavily used relative to the south. So with that, I'll take any questions you might have, and if you don't, I'll be around after the meeting too.
Brownie, one thing I forgot to mention that maybe you can, the average water level change, Wichita County, pre-WCA versus post-WCA. You remember those numbers?
I don't. Dave's asked me what was the water level changes before and after the Lima took place.
It's half a foot a year.
Actually, Bill, you got SD6 and you got Wichita.
So it went from, it was half a foot a year, basically 0.52 feet, and it's gone under a tenth of a foot.
Okay, yeah. There's definitely a shift in the water level change, and you can see it here, I guess. I mean, there's the average from 2010 to 2021. The average water level change was about a little over 0.4 feet, and since after 2014, it's up here somewhere. So yeah, I agree with those numbers.
Yeah.
Yep. So, other questions? Okay. Excellent.
Thank you.
you.
Appreciate